Okay, so for input, length of the discipline word is compound inequality. Two inequalities joined by the word and or. So if they give you two separate inequalities, which are represented by these two lines, when you put them together on one graph, it'll look like this. So in modeling, we're going to write and graph the compound inequality. Okay, letter A. They're going to give you it in word form. So here's what they give you. All real numbers that are at least -2, and there's that word, at most 4. Please write that down. All real numbers that are at least -2 and at most 4. So when I go back and look at this problem, I know that I need to know that it's at least, so at least -2, and there's my keyword right here, at most -4, so it can't be any more than -4. So how am I going to write that as an inequality? So let's look at the first one, at least -2. Okay, so I'm going to write n, that's what I'm going to use as my variable, you can do x or whatever you choose, is at least -2, so that means it's -2 or anything higher. So it's at least -2. That's my first one. And my second one is it's at most 4. So n can be 4, but nothing higher. So if we go on the side and write that step, step number 1 is to write the inequalities. Write the inequalities. So that's what we do. Write the inequalities. So now that we know, because part of the direction said to write it, now we need to know how to graph it, okay? So that's step 2, is graph. That should be pretty easy. So I know that I'm going to graph, between -3 and 4, so I'm going to draw my line. So I'm going to label -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's my graph. So now I'm going to take the first equation. N is greater than or equal to -2. So I know that it's going to be a closed circle on the -2, and that means I'm going to shade this way. But this also says, my second one, that it's less than or equal to 4, so I'm going to put a closed circle over the 4. So the shaded area is the area in between -2 and +4. That's how you graph them together. Ask me after. So closed circle on the -2, a closed circle on the 4, and it's graphed in between because it's all the numbers in between those two things. Hands on your head if that makes sense. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, we're going to put this as letter B. Letter B. This one says, all real numbers greater than -2, but less than 9. All real numbers greater than -2, but less than 9. So if I go back and look at this, I know that it's going to be greater than -2, less than 9. So I'm going to write down each inequality. So the first one is, I'm going to use x is greater than negative 2. That one's easy. Greater than negative 2. And then I'm going to write my next inequality. X is, it says less than 9. Those ones are easy because they don't have the words at most or at least. So then, step 2, I'm going to graph. So let's see, I'm going to go, let's see, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, you can number them any way you want. Mine's going to be kind of long. I'm going to take up kind of my whole paper over here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my line. You can see mine kind of goes all the way to the end. So let's look at the first one. X is greater than negative 2. So that means it's going to be an open circle. And that means I'm going to shade this way. But before I do that, let me look at the second one. X is less than 9. So that's going to be an open circle over the 9. So everything that's shaded is in between. Because X greater than means it's shaded to the right. And less than the 9 means it's shaded to the left. So all the numbers in between these two are going to be shaded on the graph. Please do that on your notes. Maybe I'll do a note check today, because some people look a little sleepy. There you go. I know you just had snack. Alright, so that's how you graph them. Now we're going to learn how to solve a compound inequality using the word and. Okay? So I'm going to label this section of our notes. Solving a compound inequality using and. Okay. So this next part of our notes, you're going to see problems that don't have words. It's actually going to be in number form. So let's look at letter A right here. You're going to have negative 4 is less than r minus 5 is less than or equal to negative 1. Okay, what I want you to do is to circle each equation. I'm going to use different colors so you can see, okay? So this is my first equation right here. And then this is my second equation right here. Please do that in your notes. So my first equation is the negative 4 is less than r minus 5. My second equation is r minus 5 is less than or equal to negative 1. Okay, so that's your step number 1 is circle each equation. Step number 1, circle each equation. Step 2 is going to be to draw a line, and I'll show you what that means. So I know that this equation right here, I'm going to put over here, and this equation over here, I'm going to write over here, so I have them separately. So over here I have negative 4 is less than r minus 5. And over here I have r minus 5 is less than or equal to negative 1. So I circled each one and drew a line so that they're separate. So I know there's two separate equations. Okay, so step 3, I'm going to solve for each. Step number 3, solve for each. Solve for each. So I'm going to go over here to this side, and I'm going to solve it for r. So what am I going to do? I'm going to add 5 to both sides, just like it's an algebraic equation. Do that in your notes, don't just stare at me. So the 5's cancel. I'm left with r on this side. My sign stays the same. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. So I solve for that side. Now I'm going to solve for the other equation. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Draw my line. My 5's cancel. I'm left with r is less than or equal to negative 1 plus 5 is 4. So now if I bring these two together to make one equation, at the end I'm going to write it like it was in the beginning. So I'm going to put r in the center. Over here, 1 is less than r, but r of this equation is less than or equal to 4. So if I look, if I covered this 4 up, this is this equation. Did everyone see that? If I cover this one up, this is this equation. I'm just putting them together. That's it. And that's the answer. I went ahead once you've written that down. Okay. All right, let's try another one of those. We'll move a little faster. Negative 6 is less than or equal to 3x, which is less than 15. Write that down. Okay, so step 1 is circle each equation. This is one equation here. Now I'm going to write, and this is the other equation here. And I'm going to write. So on the left-hand side, I have negative 6 is less than or equal to 3x. And on this side, I have 3x is less than 15. So I pulled apart those two equations. So now I'm going to solve for each. That's step number 3. We circled, we drew the lines, now I'm going to solve. So to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. I didn't divide by a negative, so my sign's going to stay the same. I'm left with x on this side because my 3's cancel. 3 over 3 is like 1x. And negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. So I solve for that one. So now I'm going to go solve for the other one. To get x by itself, I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides. X is less than, 3 is cancel, because 3 over 3 is 1. That's like 1x. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So now, to complete my answer, I'm going to bring those two together. My first equation is negative 2 is less than or equal to x, and x is less than 5. So that if I covered this one up, that's this equation. If I covered this side up, that's this equation. They're just put together. And that's your answer. Now let's try and graph this one. Let's try and graph this one. So I'm going to draw a graph. Let's see, I'm going to go negative 3, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my first one, x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So I know the negative 2 is going to have a closed circle. And then I have x is less than 5. So I'm going to have an open circle for the 5 because it's not or equal to. If I wrote this again, right, if this was x first, that's how it would look. So that means it's shaded inwards, and my 5 is shaded the other way. When the numbers are put together by the word and, you're usually going to be shading in towards each other. When you see the word or, you'll usually shade out away from each other. This is an and problem, so that's how you would graph. And Any questions on that one? Okay. Okay, moving on. We're going to be writing compound inequalities. So this section of our notes is called writing compound inequalities. So label that in your notes because these are all different types of problems. Writing compound inequalities. Okay, so you might get one that looks like this, so it's in word form again. All real numbers that are less than -3, here's the or type problems, or greater than 7. Please write it down. So this is an or problem. So with the or problems, are we going to shade inwards? No, they're going to shade away from each other. So I'm going to go back and look and say, less than -3 or greater than 7. Just like in the same steps as the and problem, I'm going to write the inequalities first. So my first inequality is that x is going to be less than -3. Or my second inequality is x is going to be greater than 7. We found the words and transferred them. So lastly, I'm going to graph the solution. Okay, so I'm going to draw my graph. Let's say this is -3. Let's say this is 0. Let's say this is 3. And this is 5. And this is 7. I went by, skipped a little bit. So my graph is smaller. Okay, x is less than -3. So that's an open circle. And the mouth is pointing like an arrow to the left. So I'm going to shade to the left. And it's also greater than 7. So an open circle, it's pointing to the right. So I'm going to shade to the right. So when you have or problems, they shade away from each other. Please make sure you have that graph in your notes. You know how to put your pencil up. Okay. All right. You might also get something that asks you. This is letter B. Discounted fares are available to children, right with me, 12 and under, or to adults at least 60 years of age. There you go. So think like if you're going to an amusement park and they usually say that you might have a discounted rate of something and children 12 and under might get a discount on that ticket and people who are, senior fares, 60 or older might get that. So when I look back at this problem, I know that it's going to be 12 and under. So you have to be 12 years old or younger. And then 60 years of age at least. So you could be 61, 62, even older. Okay, so same thing. My first inequality is going to be x is, you have to be at least 12. 12 or younger. So 12 or younger. So it could be 12 or anything less. Or, everyone's writing with me, you can be 60 or older. So it could be 60 or even higher in age. Okay, so now that I've written these two inequalities, I can graph them. I'm going to graph by 10. So I'm going to go 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Draw your graph, please. Everyone drew it? Okay, so 12 would be right about here. Closed circle. Pointing to the left. Shade to the left. 60, this is or equal to, so it's a closed circle. Pointing to the right. Shade to the right. We have one more type to go over. The last type is we're going to be solving a compound inequality using 4, you guessed it, 4. Last part of our notes. Solving a compound inequality using OR. So this is in number form. So let's look at A. This says to solve 4x plus 3 is less than -5, or -2x plus 7 is greater than 1. Then they want you to graph it. So what I like to do to solve these problems is I like to draw a line to separate them. And I like to put a big OR on the line. So my first equation, this one right here, is going to go on this side of my line. And my second equation is going to go on this side. So I have 4x plus 3 is less than -5. Oops, wrong color. And on the other side, I have -2x plus 7 is less than 1. So now I can solve for each side. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides on this one. My 3's cancel. I'm left with 4x is less than, same signs add and keep, -8. To isolate the variable, I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. It's funny how some of you are staring at the screen and aren't writing as I'm writing. I don't know if you know ahead of me or what's going on. Don't go ahead. 4's cancel. X is less than -8 divided by 4 is -2. So I solved one side. So now I'm going to go and solve the other side. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides to get x by itself. My 7's are going to cancel, and I'm left with -2x is less than, different sign subtract, -6. To get x by itself, oh, I'm dividing by a negative. I know that means something. I know that Miss Graham said when I divide or multiply by a negative, my sign is going to change. It's going to flip. So then my -2's cancel. I'm left with x. My sign has flipped because I divided by a negative. -6 divided by -2 is a +3. So I've solved both sides. So the last thing they asked me to do now, since I've solved x is less than -2 and x is greater than 3, they asked me to graph it. Easy, I can do that. I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to go -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone draw that graph. So I take that first equation, x is less than -2. So I know it's an open circle because it's just less than. And it's pointing to the left, so I'm going to shade to the left. And my other equation says x is greater than 3. So I'm going to put an open circle over the 3 because it's just greater than, not or equal to. It's pointing to the right, so I'm going to shade to the right. That's it. So the OR problems are easier because they already kind of split it for you. The AND ones, you have to split it yourself. Last example of that same type, and then we'll do checking for understanding. So let's call this letter B. Solve -2x plus 7 is greater than 3, or 3x minus 4 is greater than or equal to 5. And then they want us to graph. So I'm going to draw my line down the middle with my OR sign, so I put them on each side. That's different. I know that this equation I'm going to write over here. So that's -2x plus 7 is greater than 3. And I'm going to take this equation right here and write it. And that's going to be 3x minus 4 is greater than or equal to 5. Okay, so I'm going to solve for each one. So on this side, I need to isolate the variable, so I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. Draw my line under. +7, -7 is 0. Again, I don't get how people are looking and not writing. It doesn't make any sense to me. -2x is greater than, different sign subtract, -4. To isolate the variable, I'm going to divide by -2. Oh, I remember, divide or multiply by a negative, my sign is going to flip. So the greater than sign now is a less than sign. The 2's cancel. X is now, switching the sign, less than, -4 divided by -2 is a +2. And then you're going to solve the other one on the other side. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Draw my line under. My 4's cancel. 3x is greater than or equal to 5 plus 4 is 9. I divide by 3 on both sides. 3's cancel. X is greater than or equal to 3. Now we're going to graph. So everyone draw the graph, please. So my graph is going to go, let's see. I'm going to make this 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everyone draw your graph, please. So I'm going to look at the first one. X is less than 2. Open circle on the 2. It's pointing to the left, so I shade down to the left. I look at x is greater than or equal to 3, so that means it's a closed circle on the 3, because it's or equal to, and then it shades pointing to the right. And that's what your graph should look like. You can go ahead and stop the recording, Alex. Thank you.